All right. All right. Hi and welcome everyone. My name is Jason Padilla and I am your technical host for today's webinar. This webinar is hosted by ASPB's Early Career Plant Scientist section. I would like to give a special thank you to all our ASPB members who are attending today. Your membership dues help support make this webinar possible. For any of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today and use the discount code %10 to receive a 10% discount on registration. ASPB members get early access to these webinars, and you can learn more about ASPB and all the other opportunities we provide at aspb.org. Please be sure to check out our YouTube channel where you can find many other exciting talks. We've had so many great ones already. So if you're looking for great content that you might want to use for your lab or in spaces you're in, don't forget to check out Plante YouTube channel and catch all the other great recordings of our various seminars. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to make sure that you get most out of your attendance today. If you're experiencing technical issues, please let us know of those by using the chat box, or you can email me directly at jpadilla@aspb.org. If you have any questions for our guest speakers, please add them to the Zoom Q&A box. Our moderator will be sharing them with our speakers. If you have trouble connecting or need to leave the webinar early, please know that the recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel. So be sure to follow your YouTube channel and receive notification when this content is posted. All right. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to ESPS Representative Brianna Griffin, who will moderate today's session. So take it away, Brianna.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brianna Griffin. I'm a PhD student at Iowa State University, and I will be moderating this session. So if you have any questions, please add them into the Q&A box, please. So I would like to start with everyone giving introductions. So we'll start with Gerline.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gerline Kaur. I finished my PhD from the University of Florida in December 22, and I'll be joining Syngenta as a plant breeder next month.
Melissa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Draves. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Plant Science here at University of Missouri, and I work in the Flint Garcia lab, and my research is focused on heirloom maize from the United States.
Summer.
Hey, y'all. I'm Summer Blanco. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Georgia. I did my undergraduate degree at a Cal State, predominantly undergrad institution, Cal Poly Pomona, and also did a post-baccalaureate research experience for a year at Michigan State. So I'm happy to speak on things before grad school that aren't a master's degree. I also applied for the GRFP as a post-baccalaureate student and was awarded the pre-doc. So happy to speak about that experience as well.
Patrick.
I'm Patrick, he, him pronouns. I am currently a postdoc at Penn State, where I actually got my bachelor's. I also just wrapped up my PhD about a year ago at UC Riverside. I majored in plant biology. I worked under Dr. Linda Walling. And currently, I work on gene expression in the cocoa tree, specifically focusing on tissue-specific gene expression and chromatin accessibility.
And Kevin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Cope. I'm a scientist too, doing plant physiology research and biologics at Bayer Crop Science. I graduated with a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison just about 4 years ago. And I'm happy to share any experiences or any of my experience about transitioning from academia to industry and any other questions you may have related to that.
All right. So I would like to start with a question. How did you guys choose the school you ended up in, and like what lab you ended up joining? And anybody can start.
I can take it. So I was very specific on the topic I wanted to do research on. I mentioned I'm working in biologics. That's just another way in industry of saying plant microbe interactions. I was very interested in understanding how plants associate with beneficial microbes like arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and rhizobia. And so I started looking for labs in the US that were doing research in that subject area, just by looking at recent publications on those two types of microbes. And I found Jean-Michel Linné's lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, reached out to him with an email, introduced myself, shared a short resume with my undergraduate research experience, coursework, and stuff like that. And fortunately, he responded and he gave me some advice on what programs to apply to. So I went ahead and applied, got invited for an on-site interview at the University of Wisconsin, got to meet him in person. And the program I was targeting didn't accept me as a full student or full rotating student, but as a direct admit. And since I'd already formed that relationship with Jean-Michel, he allowed me to join his lab directly without having to do rotations. So it worked out in my case.
Yeah, Summer.
Okay, sorry, Patrick. Yeah, so I had a pretty interesting criteria. I only wanted to apply to rotation programs because I was scared of direct admit or applying to graduate school just to work with one person, because my interests were not really honed yet. So most of the programs I looked into had opportunities for you to do around 3 rotations in different labs, which I thought was going to be a really good experience for me. I also was looking for places where it didn't snow because I'm from Southern California and I lived in Michigan for a year and it was miserable for me, not the school, just the weather. I couldn't handle it. It was too dark. So that was a part of my criteria, and it feels a little silly, but as a current grad student now at Georgia, I'm happy to have the heat, sun, and humidity, and I know it makes a difference for my life quality. So that was really important for me. And another criteria that I really, really tried to vet while applying to grad schools was kind of the culture. And a part of the culture was like, did they have good work-life balance? Were people like in the lab more than 40 hours a week and kind of bummed and not having a good time? Was the department actively showing interest or movement relating to diversity, meaning like how many students of color did they have? How many faculty of color did they have? Did those people feel supported? And some of the community resources like outside of the institution. So within the institution, right, there's like your mental health resources and your cultural student centers that are super valuable. But I wanted to make sure that I lived in a place where I liked the experience outside of being a graduate student. So Athens, Georgia, they were like, has the highest bar density in the US. It's a really fun place to live. There's a really cool music scene. So yeah, a lot of things outside of grad school were pretty important to making that decision for me. And then in terms of going through a rotation program, choosing your lab is just, for me, it was just a matter of who did I kind of jibe with the most in terms of like the work culture, the folks that were in the lab at the time. Did I feel like I could communicate transparently with my PI? Those all informed the decision for the specific lab that I ended up joining.
Yeah, a lot of overlap between how Summer and I picked the school. So I'm originally from New York and I went to a Big Ten school. So State College gets like cold from like October and will be cold until like May sometimes. I'm saying that as it's like 85 right now, so we're getting a nice little break. But yeah, I picked somewhere because I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to be in grad school for at least 5 years, it can't be like unbearably cold and miserable outside. So I kind of focused on the coast. And then I think the other thing I focused on was not necessarily like the ranking of the department, but the cachet of faculty in the department. So one of the things that I didn't quite realize until I got to Riverside for a visit was that a lot of those names were like names that like people in the discipline knew. So that's quite helpful. Maybe not necessarily, I think in one light, as Summer had mentioned, rotating is great because you get a nice little amuse bouche of everything. But I think the other thing where it's helpful is with your committee. So like your dissertation committee and your qualifying committee, because I think one thing that is a real blind spot in academia is the tendency to kind of latch on to one viewpoint, and you're like, oh, well, I'm from lab X, so I'm going to kind of do things in the mold of lab X. And I think going to an institution where you have a lot of collaboration and a lot of like active discussion amongst labs is really, really advantageous, because you get to see how things are done from different lenses. And I think a lot of times in science, we say like things are right and wrong, and there are instances where things are binary, but sometimes there are multiple ways to, do the right thing. And I think thinking about that and thinking about areas where there's open collaboration and like a large swath of people who are doing things that you're interested in is probably something, looking back, that I thought about, but would have thought about even more.
One thing that I would just add to this is one part, obviously a lot of my considerations were similar to the other panelists, but also I looked at the financial information when I was making decisions about offers. Thankfully, I was able to like compare offers, but you also have to take into perspective where those schools are located. So, I'm still living in the Midwest, so it's considerably cheaper than if I were going to school somewhere on the coast. So that was definitely something that I took into consideration when I was choosing my school.
Yeah, I think I can also add on to the technical part. I'm plant breeder by training, and my work was focused on traditional plant breeding in my master's. And for my PhD, I was looking for something with integrated genomics and bioinformatics techniques. So that played an important part in my decision for choosing for a lab. And I ended up working with Dr. Haley in those. I was not crop specific or weather specific, but yeah, I ended up working in University of Florida with tomatoes and with Haley. And I think the most important part for us lab was team building. And I'm not like what I vouched for really worked in that lab.
All right. Continuing off of that, what aspects were you guys looking at? Like, what did you think about while you were trying to choose an advisor or a mentor? Like, what beyond like just, the work they were doing?
I really thought about beyond the work. I thought about the interpersonal skills and how they built their lab. And this goes kind of beyond like being racially accepting and a place that accepts folks of different gender identities and sexualities. It went to like interpersonal skills and, okay, who are the kind of people that my PI is hiring and how do they interact with each other? Because I can say that like the lab that I went to in grad school, looking back, and we had good chemistry, but like really looking back, I miss those people. We're not like great friends, but like we were phenomenal coworkers. We got along, and there was like a connective tissue there that we all understood what was going on, and we could all manage and police ourselves. And it was very nice to not have to deal with that emotional stress of like having to manage other people when you're already doing very difficult intellectual work. So I think that was probably the big thing that I looked for, and I will probably continue to look for throughout the rest of my career, is just working with folks with the emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills to kind of make the science just a little bit easier.
Yeah, to add on that, I think as I mentioned, like team building, but like a kind advisor. So as a potential grad student, you might be looking into like some recognized names and labs and schools. But I think for me, what matters the most at this point and in the future is your PI is kind or your manager is kind, and you can talk to them. It's not like if you're a student, you have less of a say. So I think that mattered the most for me.
I think something people forget that they can do is when you're considering working with a professor is you may do an informational interview with them before you even apply to grad school to get to know them, but also you can reach out to their lab members. Usually professors have websites with the members of their lab listed, and you can almost always find emails of postdocs and grad students in those labs, and just email them and say, hey, I'm considering applying to the grad program at your university. I'd be very interested in potentially doing a rotation with your professor. What can you tell me about your experience? Oftentimes people are very willing to share their experience. I once went and interviewed at a university, and the grad student said, don't come here. I'm just very frank. But I appreciated that because it led me to a different university that ended up being a much better fit.
Yeah, I would definitely, just to piggyback on that, I actually set up several informational interviews before applying to the grad programs and interviewing them. And one, it positioned me really well to interview since, well, I was the Zoom interview era because of COVID, but hopping on a Zoom call with somebody that I had already spoken with before was really easy in terms of interviews. And I think that helped my chances in terms of applications, but it did also allow me to ask more personal questions like, what's the work culture like? Do you expect folks to be in from 9 to 5, or do folks work remote? Is it really flexible? What do you do when someone's struggling? Let's say I have something with family come up. Are you okay if I leave the state to handle my personal emergencies? Like, those are all things that I wanted to talk about, the more personal aspect of it. And that was a really good opportunity to do so, to make sure that I had somebody who was flexible and accommodating and kind and supportive.
Okay. Let's see. How do you set and maintain boundaries with work and personal life?
I can start with this one. One thing that I found, especially in your first year, like you maybe are really ambitious and like you really want to prove yourself to your lab and to your department. For me, what I do is I take like one day off a week, like usually that's Saturday. I try not to like do my assignments or like big things for the lab. Like I really try to reserve that day as much as possible. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but most of the time when I take that day off, it really does help me like just reset and like make time for other things in my life. So that's how I tend to have a work-life balance, is just to make sure you take at least one day off a week.
I recently took Slack and Outlook off my phone because my screen time was ridiculously high because I was getting like emails and Slacks after 5 and on the weekends, and I felt obligated to respond to those. So taking that off my phone kind of removed that like mental obligation for me, and my work-life balance and my mental health have improved so much because of that. So I might recommend that for folks who struggle setting boundaries. I think sometimes grad school can make you feel obligated to be on all the time, and that's not the case. Sometimes that's like a self-imposed boundary.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I was gonna say, I think as Summer said, you have to be kind of assertive, and I think part of it is also just knowing yourself, and that's part of grad school, is some self-discovery on another level that's like not there in undergrad. But I think it's, some folks do the 9 to 5 and then they can cut off at 5:30 p.m. and then that's it. And like if you can do that, that's great. I'm more like that as a postdoc now, but in grad school, I worked with insects, so you had to tend to the colonies at all kinds of times of the day or whatever. So what I would do is I would just make sure I had that conversation with my PI, that she kind of knew my working style and knew that like, hey, I watch college football on Saturday mornings. So like from pretty much 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., like unless our greenhouse is on fire, like don't bother me. And that worked because like at other times of the week, I compensated for it and was like there and active, but like I needed that 3 hours on a Saturday morning, just like completely blocked off to just like shut off from science. And the fact that like my PI understood that about my personality made it work. So she wasn't asking like, oh, well, we have the screen to do this week. Like, where's Patrick? It's like, no, it got done at like 7 a.m. So like he can kind of do his thing. So I think part of maintaining a good work-life balance is knowing yourself. And then once you know yourself, kind of like assert yourself with the people in the lab. Because not everybody is going to always respect your agency in the way that they need to. And you kind of have to be sometimes your best advocate.
I'll build off what Patrick was saying. I think it's important that people keep in mind two principles: effective communication and aligning expectations. If you take the time to, ask your advisor, what is your expectations, and then also express your expectations, you can come to a compromised agreement where you both understand this is how we're going to work together. And then when you have to deviate from that, communicate about it clearly. If you already have a channel opened up of how you're going to communicate with each other, then you can avoid a lot of friction that can come when things don't work out exactly the way they should have. But also in my case, my wife and I decided that we wanted to start a family when I was in grad school, which was a very difficult thing to do, but we made it work. I ended up treating my grad school experience as a 9-to-5 job. And one way I was able to do that was to make it also a mentoring experience, where I recruited undergrads to work with me so they could get an undergrad experience just like I had got an undergraduate research experience. And through working with them and helping them get that research experience, I was able to have, instead of just my 2 hands, I had sometimes 4, 6, or even 8 hands helping me do the work. And so in the end, when I published some of my papers, I think it was 5 or 6 undergrads on one of my plant cell papers, which is great for them and also great for me because we got so much research done, even though I was working a fairly normal 9-to-5 job, except in rare cases when I'd have to come in on the weekend and when the microscope was available or whatever. But for the most part, you can set your boundaries and stick to them and do well.
There's 2 questions that are pretty similar, so I'll try to wrap them together. But did you come into the field already knowing what you wanted to do? Did you have a different background beyond plant biology? If so, or if you didn't know initially, or you maybe pivoted a little bit, how did you actually build up those skills to be good in that area, or to actually potentially make up in areas that you were actually lacking in, especially for a different field choice?
I want to jump on this one kind of early because I'm kind of having a career crisis right now. So it's a great question, and it's also a terrible question, but not for the reason that you think. The only reason I say it's a terrible question is because you will always have that thought in the back of your head about what am I doing with my career? Is this right? Is this wrong? So that's the only reason I criticize that question. But otherwise, it is a phenomenal question. I think part of why, and you tell yourself this once you get out of grad school, because you don't realize this because there's a lot of self-doubt. You're in grad school because somebody thought that you were smart enough to figure it out. So if you want to do it and you put it in your personal statement and somebody admitted you in their lab, whether or not you can do it at that point doesn't really matter. Your PI believes that you can do it. Now, whether or not they're supporting you in the way that you can get to that point of mastery is another discussion. But I think it shouldn't. I think part of it matters in that you're always going to kind of psych yourself out. But in the other sense, that's kind of why you're there, to kind of just build skills and learn things that you don't know. Because if you were going in to just supplement what you've done in the lab as an undergrad for 4 years, it kind of wouldn't be that fun. So I think part of building that skill set is having some self-awareness of knowing what you are good at and not good at, looking for seminars, looking for webinars, and just being aware that this is always a learning process, and that even when you defend your dissertation, that day, there are going to be things that you learn at your defense from your committee that you can use to better yourself through your career. Brianna, could you ask the second part of that question? I want to make sure I hit it.
If there were things that you didn't know, how you actually would help build those skills.
Yeah, so I think I kind of hit that. Webinars, workshops. I would say that should be a big factor in where you're looking at a grad school. Just look for places that have workshops and events that you can constantly learn and just better yourself. And I will also say, don't worry about career changes and switches, because I'm 30 and I have a PhD and I do not know what I want to do with my life. So
Okay, this one's
I can
actually,
actually add something real quick to that.
Okay.
For my research in my undergrad, I mean, for my PhD, I had to do a lot of confocal microscopy. There was a lot of molecular biology. I did a lot of work with microbes that I'd never even heard about, honestly. And that's just going to be part of the grad experience. It's going to be a lot of learning, but most PhD programs go on for minimum 3, usually 4, at least 5. Sometimes they go on even longer, depending on the type of project and the plants you're working with, which is fine. I mean, it's an experience to go out and learn new things, but I took courses that aligned with the skills that I needed to have for the research I was doing. And that made those courses so much more meaningful because I was able to learn skills that I knew I was going to use. It made class time fun. And then it made doing my research fun because I got to apply this new skill and work with, you know, $1 million confocal microscope, which was just so cool. But anyways, you can design your coursework with help of your advisor and your committee to help you develop the skills that will allow you to succeed in your research.
And this question is actually for you, Kevin. This person has children and they're reconsidering being in school, and they are unsure about that. And I think they're wondering how you dealt with being a father and having children, and how you managed to balance, like, you know, having, you know, your family at home that you had to take care of it, and how, if you can speak on that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a very charged question. You know, there's all kinds of different family situations. You could be a mother who's a grad student, you could be a father who's a grad student, depending on your family dynamics. That could totally change how it works out. In my case, my wife had already done some graduate work, and so she took a break and she decided to be the primary caretaker of our kids instead of doing daycare. And so that's how we made it work. Since I treated my job, since I treated my grad experience as a job, I would come home and support as much as I was able. And it worked out. We were able to balance, you know, taking care of our kids as equally as we could. But, you know, there may be single parents out there who have children, and you got to have serious conversations with your advisors to let them know, this is my life situation. I need you to help accommodate my situation. If it takes me longer to do my grad school experience, fine. Let's make it work. And you won't regret taking the time to do the grad school experience because it opens up so many more opportunities to you in terms of employment. I work at Bayer Crop Science, where there's like, and at the location I'm at, there's thousands of scientists with PhDs, and they couldn't hold their positions unless they had PhDs. And many of those who've gone on and advanced in their careers at the company also couldn't have taken higher up positions without having PhDs. It's not essential, but it does definitely help you advance quicker and ultimately achieve your highest income that you're able to in your career. So I mean, if you can figure out a way to get your advisor on board and helping you adapt your grad school experience, hopefully that will help you make it work. And if they won't adjust, then maybe you need to look for a different advisor and transition, which is a hard move too.
So what should you be doing as a grad student beyond coursework and research to prepare for future careers?
I can start on that since I recently finished grad school and switching to the other side. At UF, I the school, how much of exposure you want and how much of an exposure is there. Even if it's available, how much opportunities you can create yourself. So I was a part of student organizations which had high visibility, where you can organize symposiums or plant-related workshops. Even Zoom opened up so many opportunities when we hit COVID. And how I got in touch with ASPB, I only attended one ASPB meeting last month for the first time. So it is up to you to create the opportunities, even if there are not any. But I would highly suggest to make yourself visible in public domain. If you have an active LinkedIn, active Twitter, keep updating. You don't have to do this as like a one-sided job or something. You have to complement your research skills. You can talk about what you work for. You can talk about the community hours at UF here. We celebrate DNA Day, where you go and teach school kids about DNA so that they can take up science as their career, which I did and I enjoyed the most. So there were a couple of opportunities that I identified along the progression of my PhD. So I decided there were things I want to do in first year or second year. And what I did in second year, I might not be able to do those in my final year. So I kind of categorized those and I identified the opportunities and talked to the students who were ahead of me in the timeline. If I missed any opportunity, like what would they suggest? I think that worked the most for me, talking to my office mates, talking to my classmates, if I was not aware for any opportunity. So that worked the most with me.
I'm so glad this question was asked. I didn't ask myself the question soon enough as a grad student, and I really wish I had. In retrospect, I realized that there were some students who did ask themselves this question, and they did something that was very wise. Patrick mentioned he's still trying to decide what he wants to do, and I was also in that situation a couple years into my postdoc. I was applying to academic, industrial, and government research positions just because I was trying to get a job, right? It's really exciting and fun to be a grad student, to discover new things in your research, to be at the forefront of your field. But the reality is 10 maximum, probably closer to 5% of PhDs will go on and become professors. And that's okay. There are so many other great careers out there. If you haven't attended ASPB and participated in the career workshops that are offered there, I'd strongly encourage you to do that this year if you're going to the conference. I can drop, am I allowed to use the chat in this, Brianna?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll drop a link in there to a Twitter post I did when I got my current job that just explained the steps I went through in like 20 tweets in a thread that can help you understand what you should be doing right now. Informational interviews, networking with people who are already in the kind of jobs that you'd be interested in doing can help you learn from them what you should do as a grad student to prepare for an industry job, for example. That's one thing I did. Probably a better thing I wish I'd done is that I'd looked for internship opportunities. I already talked about negotiating and communicating with your professor about expectations. If you don't know if industry is a good fit for you, figure out a summer when your research can take a break for 2 or 3 months and go and do an internship with a company. That can inform if working in a company is the right fit for you. If not, then you can check that off as something you don't want to do and pursue academics or government work or whatever more vigorously. Yeah, I'll post a Twitter thread that can answer that question in a little more detail.
And I can vouch that Twitter thread.
I can, I just want to bounce off of one thing that Kevin said, and I think it's really about I'm blanking. Oh, sorry. I remember what I want to say. So I think he was talking about internships and figuring out if industry was or was not for you. And I think a lot of times we think in the frame of like, oh, is this right for me? Is this right for me? And sometimes like you just kind of have to try things and ask like, is this wrong for me? Sometimes trying something and not liking it in academia, I think is great, because then you realize, okay, this isn't my jam. It's not my vibe. I don't want to do this. And I feel like knowing, okay, I don't want to be an academic, or I don't want to be in industry, or I don't want to do government work. Knowing that is just as valuable, I feel like, as knowing exactly what you want to do, especially if you're kind of on the fence and you're undecided. Being able to cross things off is going to make your list shorter, and eventually it's going to make it easier to kind of decide what pathway you want to go down.
Okay, so this question's been asked a couple different ways, but basically grad school is hard. How do you stay motivated? How do you keep yourself going, especially when things aren't working out the way you want to? Any advice or mantras or anything that you guys do?
As a Black person and somebody who just like, the reality was there would be days, if not weeks, where I would sit in the lab or work in the lab or be on campus, and I would not see or talk to anybody that looked like me. And that was hard. It was very, very hard. I think part of it is just reminding yourself, like, look, you're smart. Somebody wants you here, and you can't give up, which is, you know, kind of like boiler stock stuff to say. I really think you have to have a network on campus and off campus. You have to have people that like genuinely support you. And I think that understand exactly what you're going through, because there are going to be days that you spend 3 days making RNA-seq libraries and they don't work, and you're going to want to yell, and you're going to want to have an adult beverage with somebody. And you can do that in grad school if you're friends with people in your department. At the same time, there are moments when you need to divorce away from the lab, and you kind of don't want to think about it, and you want to just, you know, complain about life, which you have the right to do, and do that with people who care about you and support you and understand you. And I think you genuinely need both. And then finally, get hobbies. Just like get hobbies, get things that you have to look forward to when, like, all right, I'm in the lab today and it's 9 a.m. and I'm there till like 7 p.m. But you know what? I get to do trivia with my friends. Like that. It's a small thing, but there are days, you know, went to grad school in California, but like, and there were no winters. There were days that was the only thing that was getting me through that day. So you gotta get a support system and just find things that are gonna just keep you going. As trivial as they might be to somebody else, they mean something to you. It doesn't really matter as long as you're not hurting anybody.
I think what I can add is accepting there are high and low days, and you need to accept it and just keep going. What I wish I had known earlier is it's not only me like who have bad days, you know, so that kind of effect when you talk to other people, as Patrick said, that's where you get that positive energy from. Hey, it's normal and it happens to us. We have phases where experiments doesn't work. We had a season which we completely lost, and so there was a reason to get upset about that, but I think you need to accept it and move on. Things happen. So that's what kept me motivated. And the other thing, it's a small thing, but I really like to pack my calendar with small achievable goals. So if there is a bad day and I could hit those 3 or 4 small things, I would still feel, okay, I did something in the day and it's productive, instead of just laying low and saying I was not able to achieve anything. So those were the little tricks that worked for me during grad school.
I would also add like therapy. I mean, I feel like most grad students I know go to therapy, and there have been some months where that like appointment has been the one thing keeping me afloat, and that's all right. Like it's like that sometimes, but like I think I started looking for my therapist as soon as I got to Athens, because I was like, all right, I'm not in crisis right now, but I want to have rapport built with a professional so that like if I am in crisis or if I am really going through the mud, I have somebody there who knows me, who can help me get through it. And yeah, it's a really valuable resource. And also like, unfortunately, there's a lot of graduate students that will develop like depression or anxiety while they're in grad school. And most universities have a health center associated that probably have a psychologist on or a psychiatrist on their staff. And so I know a lot of folks who get medication and who have been diagnosed for anxiety or depression and can get their medication managed at the local health center. And it also sometimes has therapy associated with, so look at your university mental health resources if that's something that you maybe already have a pre-existing diagnosis and you know that like that's something you might experience.
One thing that I would just add to this question is when Patrick was talking about like having your network and like your support system, make sure you're looking for people not only like in your lab, but outside of your lab, whether that's in your own department or a different department, or someone who's not in grad school is also really helpful to sort of give you some perspective. Because I think sometimes like you start to build community and then you look around and you realize like, oh, my community is all graduate students, which is great, but sometimes it's good to have that outside perspective of someone who's not in grad school so that, you know, they can remind you like, this is a long journey, like you're not here for the sprint, and just sort of give you like that outside perspective.
Slightly on an off tangent, I think, bouncing off of what Melissa just said, I think it's also just like a good practice to like network with people that aren't in your lab, because like you are going to be somewhere in your career upward and you're gonna want to know some people who are in places that you are not. And it's just nice to know those people and for those people to have a good positive impression of you. And it's nice to know people in your lab, but diversify your, you know, your social network. It's also great because people get married and weddings all over the country are very fun to go to.
I'll add that it's not just grad school that's hard. Life is just hard. And the highs and lows you experience in grad school might be the most extreme you've experienced in life up to that point, but they will continue. One thing I've come to appreciate as I've grown older, I'm not that old, I make myself sound like an old guy. You won't enjoy the great experiences as much unless you've experienced, you know, even more terrible experiences. The contrast that you experience between those is kind of just part of life, and you will appreciate the good moments much more if you've had some terrible moments. I'm not trying to downplay the misery of those terrible moments, but they will come. One thing I did to manage stress was, you know, having a workout plan. As a grad student, I rode my bike everywhere, and you can ride really fast when an experiment didn't work that day and burn a lot of calories and feel much better after, you know, going a few miles. Or in my postdoc, I started weightlifting, and, you know, deadlifting a few 100 pounds really releases a lot of that anxiety. So, I mean, we're telling you all these things that you should be doing. I hope it's not overwhelming you, but finding a way to structure your life so it's balanced in several areas, you know, physically, mentally, emotionally, and so forth. It's just a good habit for life.
So this might be more for probably Melissa and Kevin. How does working in a government, like working for a government lab, differ from working in an academic lab, like one that's more affiliated with the university?
Yeah, I can start with this. So my lab is affiliated with the USDA, and probably the biggest difference that I've noticed is that PIs who work for the USDA tend to not have to teach as much, if at all. And so it's definitely different because my PI doesn't have a class that she has to plan for every single week. So she just generally has quite a bit more time than other PIs in our department. With that, there are some like additional little things that come along with working for the USDA. Like there's a lot more paperwork associated with things, a lot more training. So sometimes like the administrative stuff can get a little bit annoying, but I would say overall, like it's really like trivial compared to like having more time with my PI is really invaluable. So I've really enjoyed being in a lab that is with the USDA.
So my second postdoc was at the Department of Energy lab, Oak Ridge National Lab. And it's interesting because a lot of the national labs in the DOE, they structure themselves like a company, and they do industrial scale research, industrial scale academic research is how I should say it. And they can do that because they have a lot of government money. It's not limitless, but it's pretty substantial. And so one thing that's nice is they pay more as a postdoc at national labs. So that relieves some of the financial strain of, continuing to do academic work. But as Melissa was alluding to, there's a little more focus because there's not the distraction of, doing your research and doing, university things like courses, TAing, or, whatever it may be. So I ended up probably having more projects I was working on and contributing to, both as the lead researcher on that project and also as a collaborator helping with those projects. And so I enjoyed that. That's part of the reason I felt like I'd be able to switch over to industry pretty well when I finally got a job offer. But it's just different. It's another type of job. You adapt to it as you experience it, and it may be for you, it may not be for you. For me, staying at Oak Ridge National Lab wouldn't have been a good fit because I really wanted to end up in the agriculture sector, not working on plants from a bioenergy standpoint. So I'm happy with the transition I made from working at a national lab to now working in, the agriculture sector and industry.
So everyone talks a lot about the lows of grad school, but what are some things to be excited about?
All the other, oh man, I'm gonna sound bad. All the other stuff is good. Like the lab stuff is fun, which is why you're in grad school, because you're there to do research and it's fun and it's exciting. But I think all the extracurricular stuff is really, really exciting because that's really where you get to meet people. I was the ECPS EDI co-chair, the position that Brianna was in, for 2 years, and that was fun. That was an absolute blast. I met a ton of people who I go to conferences now, and I always kind of just feel like I can walk into a conference and I'm like a half dozen people here who I know. So I'd say that getting experiments to work is always just kind of great, especially when you've been working on it. And I feel like people kind of sell themselves short sometimes. And it's like, no, you troubleshot something, you should be proud. I just troubleshot something like a month ago, and there was nobody in lab on Saturday. And I was like, I left just like, it was like, yeah, I was, so I think things working is always good. And then I think just I think just the actual experience of grad school, you're around smart people, you're just around very talented and very intellectual people, and you get paid to be smart and just be around them. And I think sometimes there are just kind of moments where you're at a social hour and you're just talking to a PI that you've never spoken to, and they ask you about your research, and then you go off on some weird tangent and you get inspired to go take something that they mentioned into the lab. I think all of those things are really, really special parts of grad school that they don't really sell to you in the brochures, but I think those are the things that kind of give you that little lift when you need it.
I think I would add to the flexibility part. It's not long ago that I was in grad school, but I can already feel the flexibility part. You have so much room to pitch in new ideas, or bring in more projects, or talk to your advisor about any collaborative project, not only project, but even like Patrick said, co-curricular activities. You can participate in the leadership or other experiences. And the other thing that I just realized, you can apply to as many grants or, awards or travel awards or anything like that, being outside of the student phase. So that's kind of hitting the reality. And yeah, there are, I would say, being a grad student, yes, there are, as Kevin earlier said, life is hard itself. So grad school is hard, but I think this is the most enjoyable phase. And I can vouch for that not long ago. So it was the most enjoyable experience of my life, and I'm already kind of missing it. Not that I want to go back, but yeah.
This is kind of like a different angle, but one of the things I really love about grad school, which I didn't think I would, because everybody kind of gripes about it, is like teaching in grad school. Like it adds another 20 hours of things to do in your schedule, but engaging with our undergraduates, like our intro biology students, it really inspires me and gives me energy. It's also really cool to be like, oh, like I'm the person in front of 30 students that's like the educator in the room. It kind of reminds you of what you're capable of and what you know. Like, oh, I have a whole degree and I can actually like speak on these topics. So I don't know, that really excites me about graduate school. I look forward to when I get to see my students and see them succeed. And also like grad school, I think, is a place where I feel like I've been lost in some periods during grad school, but there's also been periods where I'm like, oh, I think I found the thing that I really, really love and I really want to do. And I feel like that's a really rewarding experience to be like, oh, this is it. I found this thing that I'm really passionate about, and I found it in this place. And this is probably the only place that I would have found it.
I'll add, besides, experiments working, getting a paper published, getting a job, getting a fellowship. I also had 2 kids. I mean, that was so cool. I had the opportunity to go be part of the Boy Scouts, was a Scoutmaster, and helped 6 boys earn the Eagle Scout rank. So there's not just things exciting in grad school. When you have those extracurricular things, you can find joy in those too when you are having those low moments in grad school. But obviously you want to shoot to have great things in grad school too, to keep you motivated. Yeah, I think mentoring students was extremely rewarding, not just TAing, but actually mentoring students and doing research. When you are to the point that you understand something well enough that you can explain it to somebody who has no idea what it is, and then teach them to do it as well as you do it, if not better, which is really cool when your undergrads do things better than you. That's just so rewarding. And then to go see them go on to grad school or go to take a job in industry, you just know, like, man, I had an impact. I helped somebody take a step in their life.
So there's a couple of questions on networking. So how do you suggest networking while you're in grad school, like making a community and potentially networking to find a job eventually?
So I think to build community, I'll do something which if anybody knows me from UC Riverside, I kind of have a reputation for this. I would always ask a question at seminar. I would always like try to make it a point of duty to ask a question at seminar and just be that person and try to ask a genuinely thoughtful question, because eventually like people are going to realize like, oh, like who in God's name is this person? And then if it's a PI, like if you're at a social event, they're going to pull you to the side and be like, oh yeah, I've noticed that you've been asking a lot of questions. And like, that's the thing that like PIs and postdocs, like they pick up on. I think if you are more anxious and that's not quite your jam, starting a journal club. Not everybody's lab meetings have journal clubs, and that might be a great way to get people of like minds that aren't in the same labs in the same room together. I also think joining committees, there is service that always needs to be done in the department, whether it's serving underrepresented groups at the university, outside of the university, and being an ambassador of science. I think that those might be opportunities where you're getting that nice little intersection of like, we're doing real science, but we're also like socializing and interacting, and you build rapport that way. So those are, I think, 3 easy ways that, you can do that.
I'm going to put a shameless plug in for a workshop that I'm hosting. It's a virtual workshop at ASPB this year. If you're going, please join it. It's networking into industrial, government, and academic jobs. So that kind of showing a spin on how networking works in those different domains. I got a couple of panelists from those different areas that will be talking about how they use networking to get into their jobs. But some key takeaways I would say from my experience is really using conferences as a time to shine. So like, let's say you did get a really cool result and you're able to make a poster about it. don't just stand at your poster when it's your turn. When you're at lunches, when you're at social events during the conferences, literally have the courage to go up to the top people in your field and be like, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm doing research in this area. I'd really like your input. When you tell them, hey, I think you're pretty smart, you could probably share some of your knowledge with me, they'll be like, oh yes, I'll come do that. They'll come and they'll go right to your poster, and you'll probably, learn something you didn't even think about. You usually have to wait till the reviewer told you to do that, and you have to rewrite your paper after doing more experiments. I literally had one of the big shots that I took to one of my posters at a conference. He ended up being the editor for one of the articles I wrote. And because he had seen that I'd taken his advice and did additional experiments and put them into the story that I was telling with my research, he became an advocate for my paper and helped us get it published in much quicker time than we probably would have if we'd had a different editor. And it's unfortunate that's how the publishing system works, but it's kind of true. You kind of have to know people, and they will help you get your papers through. So it pays to network, not only for publishing, but also for just building connections for future employment.
Okay, so we are coming to about the end of our time with each other. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions, but I will be sending them to the panelists, so potentially we'll get some of those answers back. However, I guess my final question to the panelists is, do you guys have any advice or any final things you want to share with everybody? Any just general advice about grad school?
One thing that I would say is, like, I was in the position a year ago where I had to make a decision regarding grad school. And so I would just say, make sure you take your time. Especially when you're applying to schools, they're going to be, asking for your response right away, but really just take your time. Make sure you ask all of the questions, even if they're considered tough questions, ask about the financial situation, ask about the school environment. So just really decide to go to grad school on your own terms, because I think that really taking the time to make that decision is really important, because it's the next 3 to 5 years of your life. So yeah.
I think I just, Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add a quick point that self-doubt is so common in grad school. I went through it, and most of my friends that I know went through phases of self-doubt that I'm not good enough, or why I'm here, and all those phases. And I think it's normal. The only thing I would advise is reach out for help. If you think you cannot figure this thing out on yourself, just ask someone, ask your friend, ask your lab mate, or talk to your advisor or any of the committee member. I think I can't emphasize how diverse committee can play a vital role in your progress. So reach out for help and enjoy the ride.
I think you just need to always remind yourself that this is a learning process in and out of the lab. You have a very special opportunity to better yourself, just as a thinker, just not in terms of science. And don't psych yourself out. Just take every opportunity that comes to you, and especially to those students who are parts of marginalized groups where you might feel a little more isolated. Know that there are people somewhere in the country who fall into that same identity group, and that they're supporting you as well as a researcher. And we have plenty of work to do to make the space more inclusive for folks, but just know that there are always people in your corner that are supporting you. Don't give up. Just don't quit.
I would just add, if you're not on Twitter, I'd really recommend it, because that's where I feel like most scientists are on Twitter, and that's where I met a lot of the people that I ended up applying to grad school with. And then second, if you are in the process of applying, I would strongly encourage, if you're eligible, to apply for things like the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program. It'll prepare you for your grad school applications, and there's a chance that you might get funded. So make sure to look out for funding opportunities and apply.
I'll finish by saying one of the cool things about grad school is the opportunity to meet people from such diverse backgrounds. And you are a very unique person based on your life story and what has led you up to where you are now. And you have something to contribute. You may not know what that is yet, but as Patrick said, don't give up, keep fighting, work hard. Like me, it might take 3 years before you get any real data that you can share with anybody, but eventually if you work hard and troubleshoot, you will get the data, you will get the results, you will make some pretty incredible discoveries, and you'll be able to share those with the world. And you will gain the skills necessary to go on and get gainful employment that will help you find fulfillment in life. Just ride it through, like Gerline said, and enjoy the ride.
Again, I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists for speaking on some of these questions. I really appreciate you guys. And if you don't follow us on Twitter, you should look up the Early Career Plant Scientist section of ASPB. We do share a lot of information that's more pertinent to where you guys will be at in your career stages. We also try to share if there's like job postings and things like that as well. So you may find some useful things there. So otherwise, thank you guys very much.
Thank you, everyone. Again, the recording will be available later, so definitely check out our YouTube channel. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.